Stop scrolling right now. I'm about to tell you something that will shatter everything you believe about success, power, and human nature. Have you ever wondered why the nicest people you know seem to struggle the most? Why genuinely good individuals get passed over for promotions while ruthless competitors climb the ladder? Why honest politicians lose elections to those who promise everything and deliver nothing? If you think being good automatically leads to good outcomes, you're living in a dangerous fantasy. The brutal reality is that goodness can be your greatest weakness in a world designed to reward the opposite. Today, I'm going to reveal a hidden truth that a brilliant Italian philosopher discovered over 500 years ago. A truth so disturbing that it's been whispered about in the shadows of power ever since. Niccolò Machiavelli didn't just write about politics. He uncovered the darkest secret of human civilization. The secret that explains why good people suffer while bad people prosper. The secret that reveals why your kindness is being used against you every single day. This isn't some feel-good motivational speech. This is raw, uncomfortable reality that most people are too weak to face. By the end of this video, you'll understand why your moral compass might be leading you straight into disaster. Why the very qualities that make you a good person are systematically exploited by those who understand the real rules of power. And most importantly, how to protect yourself without losing your soul in the process. Now I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments. I will not be a victim of my own goodness, because what I'm about to show you will change how you see every relationship, every workplace, and every interaction for the rest of your life. Let me start with a question that's going to make you uncomfortable. When you see someone achieve massive success, do you automatically assume they're good people who worked hard and deserved it? When you see someone in power, do you believe they got there through merit and virtue? If you answered yes to either of these questions, you're about to discover how naive you really are. Machiavelli lived during one of the most chaotic periods in European history. Italy was torn apart by wars, betrayals, and political upheaval. City-states rose and fell based on the cunning of their leaders. In this laboratory of human nature, Machiavelli observed something that shocked him to his core. The rulers who succeeded weren't the most moral, the most honest, or the most virtuous. They were the most effective at using whatever methods necessary to achieve their goals. He watched good leaders fall because they couldn't bring themselves to be ruthless when the situation demanded it. He witnessed kind rulers destroyed by their own subjects who saw kindness as weakness. He saw generous leaders betrayed by the very people they helped, who interpreted generosity as stupidity. And from these observations, he developed the most controversial insight in political philosophy. Here's what Machiavelli discovered. There are two completely different sets of rules governing human behavior. There are the rules you were taught as a child. Be honest, be kind, share with others, treat people fairly, keep your promises. These are beautiful principles that create harmony in small communities where everyone knows each other. But then there are the rules that actually determine who wins and who loses in the real world. And these rules are completely different. In the real world of competition and power, being predictably good makes you easy to manipulate. When people know you'll always choose the moral path, they can force you into situations where every moral choice works against your interests. They can exploit your honesty by lying to you. They can take advantage of your kindness by being cruel. They can manipulate your fairness by being unfair themselves. This is the hidden truth that Machiavelli uncovered. Goodness is only effective when it's backed by the capability for its opposite. A person who is good because they have no other choice isn't virtuous, they're just weak. But a person who could be ruthless but chooses to be good, that person commands respect because others know there are consequences for crossing them. Think about the most respected people in your life. Are they people who never say no, never get angry, and never set boundaries? Of course not. The people you truly respect are those who are generally kind but have clear. They're honest but not stupid limits. They're generous but not naive. They understand that in a world where some people play by different rules, unconditional goodness is just another word for victimhood. Machiavelli wasn't advocating for evil. He was advocating for effectiveness. He understood that in order to protect good people and create good outcomes, leaders sometimes have to make decisions that don't look good on the surface. Sometimes preserving peace requires the threat of war. Sometimes protecting the innocent requires punishing the guilty. Sometimes building trust requires demonstrating what happens when that trust is broken. This is where most good people make their fatal mistake. They believe that good intentions automatically lead to good results. They think that if they're pure enough in their motivations, everything will work out fairly. They operate under the assumption that the universe rewards virtue and punishes vice. But the universe doesn't care about your intentions. Reality rewards effectiveness, not purity. Let me give you a modern example that will make this crystal clear. Imagine two managers at the same company. Manager A is beloved by everyone. He's kind, understanding, and never says no to his team's requests. He covers for people when they make mistakes, gives everyone the benefit of the doubt, and tries to make everyone happy. Manager B is respected but not necessarily liked. She sets clear expectations, enforces deadlines, and holds people accountable for their performance. She's fair but firm, supportive but not permissive. Which manager do you think gets better results? Which one do you think gets promoted? Manager A's team loves him, but their projects are consistently late, their quality is inconsistent, and their productivity is below average. Manager B's team performs at the highest level in the company. Her people respect her because they know exactly what's expected of them, and they trust that she'll support them when they meet those expectations. Manager A is a good person trapped by his own goodness. His inability to be firm when necessary makes him ineffective as a leader, which ultimately hurts everyone on his team. Manager B understands Machiavelli's principle. She knows that sometimes being truly good means doing things that don't feel good in the moment. Here's the psychological trap that catches good people every time. They confuse being nice with being good. But niceness and goodness are not the same thing. Niceness is about avoiding conflict and making people comfortable in the short term. Goodness is about creating the best possible outcomes in the long term, even when that requires difficult decisions. A nice parent gives their child whatever they want to avoid tantrums. A good parent sets boundaries and enforces consequences because they understand that discipline creates better outcomes for the child's future. A nice friend tells you what you want to hear to avoid uncomfortable conversations. A good friend tells you what you need to hear even when it's difficult. A nice leader avoids making hard decisions that might upset people. A good leader makes the decisions that serve the greater good, regardless of who gets upset. The tragedy of purely good people is that their commitment to always choosing the moral path makes them predictable. And predictability is weakness in any competitive environment. When your opponents know exactly how you'll respond to every situation, they can manipulate those responses to achieve their own goals. They can use your virtues against you more effectively than they could use any vice. This is why Machiavelli argued that effective leaders must learn how not to be good when circumstances require it. Not because being bad is better than being good, but because the flexibility to choose your response based on the situation is more effective than being locked into one pattern of behavior regardless of context. Drop this affirmation in the comments. I choose strategic virtue over blind goodness. The problem runs even deeper than most people realize. Modern psychological research has validated what Machiavelli observed centuries ago through direct scientific measurement. Researchers created something called the Machiavellianism scale, a test that measures how willing people are to manipulate others for personal gain. What they discovered will shock you. People who score high on this scale consistently outperform those who score low in competitive environments. They get promoted faster, earn higher salaries, and achieve positions of leadership more frequently. Meanwhile, people who score low, the genuinely good people who refuse to manipulate others, find themselves systematically disadvantaged in almost every area of life. But here's where it gets really disturbing. The research shows that highly Machiavellian individuals are specifically drawn to careers in politics, law, and business leadership, the very positions that give them power over other people's lives. They gravitate toward roles where their willingness to bend rules and manipulate situations provides the greatest advantage. This means our most important institutions are being systematically populated by people who view manipulation as a tool rather than a moral failing. Think about what this means for you personally. Every time you interact with someone in a position of authority, there's a statistical probability you're dealing with someone who scored high on measures of manipulative behavior. Your boss, your political representatives, even some of your colleagues have likely learned to use your goodness against you as a matter of routine. Here's how this plays out in your daily life. You walk into a negotiation assuming the other person shares your commitment to fairness. They walk in seeing your commitment to fairness as an exploitable weakness. You approach conflicts trying to find win-win solutions. They approach conflicts trying to win at any cost while making you think you're getting a fair deal. You build relationships based on trust and mutual respect. They build relationships based on what they can extract from you. This isn't paranoia. This is documented human behavior that plays out millions of times every day across every industry and every social structure. The people who understand these dynamics have a massive advantage over those who don't. And if you're someone who prides yourself on being genuinely good, you're operating at a severe disadvantage that you probably don't even recognize. Let me paint you a picture that will make this undeniably clear. Remember the last time you got passed over for an opportunity you deserved. Maybe it was a promotion, maybe it was recognition for work you did, maybe it was something in your personal life. Now think about who got that opportunity instead. I'm willing to bet it wasn't someone who was better you. Who was more qualified than at playing the game than you. They probably took credit for work that wasn't entirely their own. They probably positioned themselves strategically in front of decision makers. They probably said things they knew people wanted to hear, rather than what they actually believed. In other words, they did things that your moral code prevented you from doing. And because of that moral code, you lost something you deserved to someone who was willing to abandon theirs. This is the daily reality for good people in a Machiavellian world. Your virtues become your vulnerabilities. Your strengths become your weaknesses. Your commitment to doing the right thing becomes the very mechanism by which others take advantage of you. But the damage goes beyond just individual setbacks. Living as a genuinely good person in a system designed to reward the opposite creates a psychological burden that most people don't understand. You start to question yourself constantly. Why do I keep getting hurt by people I trust? Why do my honest efforts go unrecognized while others get ahead through shortcuts? Why does being good feel like such a losing strategy? This internal conflict creates what psychologists call moral injury. It's the deep psychological wound that occurs when you're forced to witness or participate in acts that violate your fundamental beliefs about right and wrong. Combat veterans experience this when they're forced to make impossible choices in war. Good people experience this when they're forced to navigate systems that reward behavior they find morally reprehensible. The symptoms are predictable. Cynicism replaces optimism. Trust becomes increasingly difficult. You start to wonder if you're the naive one for believing that goodness should be rewarded. Some people become bitter and angry. Others become depressed and withdrawn. Many simply give up and adopt the very behaviors they once despised because they can't figure out how else to survive. This is exactly what Machiavelli predicted would happen. He understood that forcing good people to choose between their principles and their success creates a tragic outcome either way. If they abandon their principles, they lose their identity and become part of the problem. If they maintain their principles, they often lose everything else. But there's a third option that Machiavelli himself advocated, though most people misunderstand it completely. He didn't argue that people should become evil. He argued that people should become strategically intelligent about when and how they express their goodness. The goal isn't to abandon your moral code. The goal is to develop the wisdom to know when your moral code is being used against you and the strength to respond appropriately. Consider this carefully. A person who gives money to every person who asks isn't being generous, they're being stupid. True generosity requires the wisdom to distinguish between those who genuinely need help and those who are simply taking advantage of your willingness to give. A person who trusts everyone they meet isn't being virtuous, they're being reckless. True virtue requires the intelligence to determine who has earned your trust and who hasn't. This is what Machiavelli meant when he wrote that princes must learn how not to be good. He wasn't advocating for cruelty or selfishness. He was advocating for the kind of sophisticated moral thinking that recognizes context, consequences, and competing obligations. Sometimes the most virtuous thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's bad behavior. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is enforce a boundary that protects both you and others from harm. The people who master this balance become what I call strategically virtuous. They maintain their core values while developing the practical wisdom to navigate complex moral situations effectively. They understand that being good doesn't mean being passive, being kind doesn't mean being weak, and being moral doesn't mean being naive. These individuals command respect because others recognize that their goodness comes from strength, not weakness. They choose to be generous because they can afford to be, not because they can't say no. They choose to be honest because they have nothing to hide, not because they're afraid of confrontation. They choose to be fair because they have the power to be unfair, but consciously reject that option. Drop this affirmation in the comments. I will be good from a position of strength, not weakness. Now, here's where this gets really interesting. The research shows that people who develop this strategic approach to virtue don't just protect themselves from manipulation. They actually become more effective at creating positive outcomes in the world. They're better leaders because they can make tough decisions when necessary. They're better friends because they can provide honest feedback when it's needed. They're better partners because they can set healthy boundaries that protect the relationship. This transformation doesn't happen overnight, and it requires you to fundamentally change how you think about power, relationships, and your own self-worth. Most people resist this shift because they've been conditioned to believe that any form of strategic thinking about human relationships is somehow dirty or manipulative. But that conditioning is exactly what keeps them trapped in cycles of being exploited and disappointed. Let me show you what this looks like in practice through a real-world scenario that probably sounds familiar. You have a colleague who constantly asks for help with their projects. At first, you're happy to assist because you believe in being a team player. But over time, you notice a pattern. This person never reciprocates when you need help. They take credit for solutions you provide. They've essentially turned you into their unpaid assistant while advancing their own career. The old version of you would continue helping because saying no feels selfish. You'd tell yourself that being helpful is just who you are, regardless of whether it's appreciated. But the strategically virtuous version of you recognizes this dynamic for what it is: exploitation disguised as collaboration. You understand that continuing to enable this behavior isn't helping anyone. It's not helping you because you're being taken advantage of. It's not helping them because you're enabling their dependency and lack of accountability. So what does the strategically virtuous person do? They don't explode in anger or create drama. They simply stop being available for one-sided requests. When asked for help, they might say something like, "I'm focused on my own projects right now, but I'd be happy to collaborate on something where we're both contributing equally." This response is honest, direct, and creates a boundary without being cruel. The manipulative colleague will likely try several tactics to re-establish the old dynamic. They might guilt you by saying you've changed or become selfish. They might try to leverage your relationship by appealing to past favors. They might even attempt to damage your reputation by suggesting you're not a team player. But because you understand these tactics, you're not controlled by them. You recognize manipulation attempts for what they are and respond accordingly. This is the power of strategic virtue. You're still fundamentally the same good person with the same values. But now you have the wisdom to recognize when those values are being exploited and the strength to protect yourself without compromising your integrity. The psychological shift required for this transformation goes deeper than just changing your behavior. It requires you to fundamentally reconsider what it means to be a good person in an imperfect world. Most people operate with a childlike understanding of morality, where good actions always lead to good outcomes and bad actions always lead to bad outcomes. But adult morality is far more complex. Consider the parent who refuses to give their teenager money for drugs. From the teenager's perspective, this parent is being mean and withholding. But from an adult perspective, this parent is being loving by refusing to enable destructive behavior. The short-term kindness of giving the money would create long-term harm. The short-term meanness of refusing creates long-term benefit. This same principle applies to every area of adult life. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for a friend is refuse to listen to them complain about the same problem for the 100th time without taking any action to solve it. Sometimes the most helpful thing you can do for a colleague is let them face the consequences of their poor planning rather than constantly rescuing them. Sometimes the most generous thing you can do is say no to requests that would overextend your resources and leave you unable to help when it really matters. The people who understand this distinction become incredibly powerful because they're no longer controlled by other people's emotional reactions to their boundaries. They don't need everyone to like them because they understand that being universally liked often means being universally taken advantage of. They're willing to disappoint people in the short term to create better outcomes in the long term. But here's what most people don't realize about developing this strategic approach to virtue. It actually makes you more generous, not less. When you stop giving your resources away to people who don't appreciate them, you have more resources available for people who do. When you stop wasting your time on one-sided relationships, you have more time for mutually beneficial connections. When you stop enabling bad behavior, you create space for good behavior to flourish. The research backs this up in fascinating ways. Studies show that people with clear boundaries actually give more to charity, volunteer more hours for causes they care about, and maintain stronger relationships with family and friends. This makes perfect sense when you think about it. People who protect their resources strategically have more resources to deploy when and where they choose. People who give everything away indiscriminately quickly find themselves with nothing left to give. This is where Machiavelli's insight becomes truly profound. He understood that sustainable goodness requires the wisdom to choose when, where, and how you express that goodness. A ruler who bankrupts the treasury through excessive generosity can't help anyone when a real crisis arrives. A leader who refuses to make tough decisions when necessary will eventually face much tougher decisions they could have prevented. A person who says yes to everything ends up being valuable to no one. The most successful people in any field understand this principle intuitively. They're selectively generous rather than universally available. They're strategically helpful rather than reflexively accommodating. They choose their battles rather than fighting every fight that presents itself. This doesn't make them less moral than people who lack these skills. It makes them more effective at creating the outcomes their morality demands. Think about the people you admire most in history. Were they people who never said no, never made anyone uncomfortable, and never took strong positions on difficult issues? Of course not. The leaders we remember and respect are those who had the courage to make unpopular decisions when those decisions served the greater good. They understood that leadership sometimes requires accepting short-term criticism to create long-term benefit. Martin Luther King Jr. was criticized by both white moderates and black radicals for his approach to civil rights. He was too aggressive for some and not aggressive enough for others. But he understood that effective moral leadership requires strategic thinking about timing, tactics, and messaging. He didn't just do what felt good in the moment. He did what would most effectively advance the cause of justice in the long term. This strategic approach to virtue extends into every aspect of personal and professional life. In business, it means being honest about capabilities and limitations rather than promising more than you can deliver. In relationships, it means addressing problems directly rather than avoiding conflict and allowing resentment to build. In parenting, it means setting and enforcing boundaries rather than trying to be your child's friend. The people who master this approach don't become cold or calculating. They become more authentically themselves because they're no longer performing goodness for other people's approval. Their moral choices come from internal conviction rather than external pressure. They help others because they choose to, not because they're afraid of being seen as selfish if they don't. But perhaps the most important aspect of this transformation is how it changes your relationship with power itself. Instead of viewing power as inherently corrupting, you begin to understand that power is simply a tool that can be used for good or ill depending on the character of the person wielding it. The goal isn't to avoid power, but to develop the wisdom and strength to use it responsibly. This shift in perspective is absolutely crucial because whether you realize it or not, you already have power in your life. You have the power to choose how you spend your time and energy. You have the power to decide which relationships to invest in and which to limit. You have the power to set standards for how others treat you. The question isn't whether you have power. The question is whether you're using that power consciously and strategically, or allowing others to use it for their own purposes. When you begin to see yourself as someone who possesses power rather than someone who is powerless, everything changes. You stop being a victim of circumstances and start being an architect of outcomes. You stop reacting to what others do to you and start proactively creating the conditions you want to experience. You stop hoping that good behavior will be rewarded and start ensuring that it is by choosing to associate with people who share your values. Drop this affirmation in the comments. I am the architect of my own outcomes. This is where Machiavelli's wisdom becomes most practical and most necessary. In a world where some people will always choose to operate without moral constraints, good people need to develop the skills to protect themselves, and this create positive change doesn't mean abandoning your principles. It means developing the sophistication to apply those principles effectively in complex situations. The alternative is to remain perpetually vulnerable to those who understand these dynamics better than you do. And that vulnerability doesn't just hurt you. It hurts everyone who depends on you, everyone you could help if you were more effective, and everyone who needs good people to be strong enough to stand up for what's right. The time has come to stop being a good person who gets crushed by the world and start being a good person who changes it. The choice is yours, but now you understand what that choice really means. The harsh reality is that this transformation isn't optional anymore. The world has evolved into a place where strategic thinking about human relationships isn't just advantageous, it's essential for survival. Every day you delay developing these skills is another day you remain vulnerable to those who mastered them long ago. Here's what happens when you finally make this shift. People start treating you differently almost immediately. They can sense that you're no longer someone who can be easily manipulated or taken advantage of. Your presence carries weight, because others recognize that you've developed the backbone to enforce your boundaries and the wisdom to choose your battles carefully. But the transformation runs deeper than just external changes. Internally, you experience a profound sense of relief. The constant anxiety about being taken advantage of begins to fade. The resentment that builds up when you feel exploited starts to dissolve. The exhaustion that comes from trying to please everyone while neglecting yourself finally lifts. You discover something remarkable. When you stop being available to everyone for everything, the people who truly value you don't disappear. In fact, they respect you more. The relationships that do fade away were never based on mutual respect to begin with. They were based on your willingness to give more than you received. Losing those relationships isn't a loss, it's a liberation. You now hold the key that unlocks the greatest mystery of human nature. The secret that separates those who command respect from those who beg for approval. The hidden truth that explains why some people rise while others remain trapped in cycles of disappointment and exploitation. Machiavelli's wisdom isn't about becoming cruel or abandoning your moral compass. It's about developing the strength to be good from a position of power rather than weakness. It's about understanding that true virtue requires the courage to set boundaries, the wisdom to choose your battles, and the backbone to enforce consequences when necessary. The choice before you is crystal clear. You can continue being the person who gets walked over, taken advantage of, and forgotten despite your best intentions. Or you can become someone who commands respect, creates meaningful change, and protects both yourself and those you care about through strategic virtue. The world doesn't need more people who are nice. It needs more people who are genuinely good and strong enough to make that goodness count. If this video opened your eyes to how you've been giving your power away, hit that like button. If you know someone trapped by their own goodness, share this message with them. Subscribe for more truths that challenge everything you think you know about success and human nature. Remember, in a world full of wolves pretending to be sheep, the greatest power belongs to those who understand the game, but refuse to lose their souls playing it. The question isn't whether you'll face manipulation and exploitation. The question is whether you'll be prepared when you do.